Hey guys, Tom here again from synthhacker.com. Welcome back to another tutorial for Massive. In this tutorial we're going to be looking at making a really nice lush chord sound, kind of influenced by ODESZA's track Bloom, which is kind of like this chill trap, like future bass type sound. I know they're not necessarily just doing that genre at the minute, but you know, it's kind of like a transferable sound. I'll demonstrate the sound quickly for you guys to listen to, and then we'll begin making it from scratch. So here it is. Really nice sound, and there's actually no external effects on this chord sound either, which is really cool. Managed to kind of get as much as I possibly could out of Massive, and I've got a couple of like tips and tricks for you guys to use to get the most out of these type of sounds. As I said at the beginning, you know, it's not necessarily although ODESZA aren't necessarily like strictly future bass or trap, a lot of the sounds that they use are really kind of like transferable into this kind of style. So we're going to be making the sound completely from scratch, but just before we do, as always guys, these videos are supported by my website over at synthhacker.com. If you want to get your hands on some really cool presets for Massive or other synths as well, in a variety of different styles, definitely go ahead and check out my preset packs, like I said, over at synthhacker.com. That really helps support me and the channel, and also you get your hands on some really nice presets as well. So yeah, thanks in advance if you decide to check that out. I really do appreciate it. But without further ado, let's begin making this really cool chord sound from scratch. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and select new sound here, so we just have a completely clean slate to work with. And what we're going to do, we're going to start in the voicing tab. Now the first thing to kind of mention is that I've got the max voices by default set to 64, which is kind of like the voices of the max number of voices of unison basically. Now if you kind of want the best, kind of richest, most full sound possible, you really want as many voices as your CPU can handle. But you know, sometimes if you like, I know back in the day when I didn't have as powerful a PC, when I was making sounds and I tried pushing the voices up too high, my CPU would just kind of like conk out and I wouldn't be able to do it. But if your CPU is struggling, what you could do is, you know, set the max voices to 64 and then record the sound as audio and just have it as audio instead, which will take some of the load off your CPU. But basically we're going to have 7 voices of unison here. We're going to make sure that the sound is polyphonic. Obviously we're inputting chords into Massive, so we need it to play more than one note at a time. And then what we're going to do, we're going to go into the unison spread page and select pitch cutoff on, so that Massive's basically detuning each of these individual voices of unison. And we're just going to do this by moving this slightly to the right. We don't want too much detune, but we want it to be kind of nice and detuned. You know, we're going to, because this is kind of like that classic, it's kind of like a kind of different take on the classic kind of like saw wave pad chord sound, but we've got some really interesting movement which I'll get onto like later on in the tutorial. The other cool trick that I'm going to show you, like I mentioned, I'd really try to get as much out of this sound as possible and as much out of Massive as possible to really kind of spread the sound across the stereo spectrum, which you really want, because you know these chord sounds are being a lot of the times being used in like trap and future bass, a lot of the time where there's not much else going on apart from like an 808 and some percussion and stuff like that. So to kind of get the most out of this sound and make it fill as much of the stereo image as possible, what you can do is select this pan position here in the voicing tab, make sure I select it's on. If we set this right to the middle, what is essentially happening is that the sound is mono, so it's not going to be spread at all. But if we move it to the right, which I did in this sound, move it like really far to the right, what's going to happen is within Massive, these different voices of unison are going to be spread across the stereo spectrum, so it's going to really fill out the mix, which we obviously want. So that covers everything in the voicing tab. We don't really need to change anything in the oscillator tab. I mean, we don't want any glide, so I guess I'll turn that down. And we don't really want any vibrato in the sound, although you can just leave that because it's not actually doing anything. But I'll just clear that up there. And what we can do here is just move into the oscillator tab. So what we're going to use is just basically saw waves for the sound. It's actually quite simple in the oscillator department for the sound. Oscillator 1, I believe I pitched up a whole octave. Oscillator 2, I left at the default, and then oscillator 3 at 24 semitones above, so 2 octaves above. This really helps fill out the frequency range. I mean, in the voicing tab, we kind of use this to fill out the stereo image, and then what we can do to make sure that we're really filling out the frequency range of the track is by pitching all these different oscillators at different octaves. Really, really cool technique. And then what we're going to do, we're going to have oscillator 1 kind of, I mean, it doesn't really make too much difference. I had it not all the way as a saw, I just had it like a little hybrid between square and saw. Oscillator 2 I had as just a saw wave. And then oscillator 3 I actually had as a square wave. What I'd recommend doing was really with this, there's no kind of right way to do it. It's just kind of tinker around with different waveforms and just kind of use your ears and see what you think kind of sounds best. The amplitude for oscillator 1 was full, amplitude just over halfway for oscillator 2, and the amplitude for oscillator 3 is just over halfway. We don't want this high end to be too harsh and loud. All of these oscillators are just being routed to filter 1 and 2, like halfway through, and I'll show you why we're doing that in just a second. And then other than that, we're not using any noise oscillators or anything like that, or any modulation. So now we can move into the filter section. We're just going to be using filter 1 for this sound. We're going to keep the amplitude around where it is and probably bring it down just a little bit. We're going to be using a low pass 2 dB filter, and don't worry, I will demonstrate the sound in just a second. Currently we just have this. Which is kind of just at the minute a really nice kind of deep pad sound. But what we want is that kind of like movement that you heard at the beginning, this kind of like rapid movement. And the way we did this, I actually put the cutoff to about halfway first of all and bring the resonance down. And then what I actually used was LFO7, which I changed to a performer. And what this performer allows you to do is kind of like an LFO, like modulation source, except it's kind of also got this like step sequencer kind of element to it. And I just used the basic default setting, which is just all of these ramp down saw waves. And then what you can do is simply just drag and drop this onto the cutoff of filter 1 and bring the modulation up just a little bit. It's kind of quite a subtle effect, but it's quite, I don't know, it's you're not really modulating much here, but it's quite noticeable, which is pretty cool. And then what we want to do is sync this up, make sure all these 3 buttons are switched on. And then we're just going to have this set to 1/16 notes, which is pretty cool, and I'll just demonstrate this. So you can hear that drastically changes the sound already. However, one thing you'll have noticed in the kind of demo that I showed at the beginning was how it kind of started smoothly at the beginning. It kind of like I don't know, like at the start it kind of like drew into it after the kick drum. And the way I did this was just in the amplitude envelope, just boosting the attack a little bit. Which you can hear, it almost sounds a bit like sidechaining, but we're just doing this kind of manually with the envelope, which is pretty cool. And you'll want to make sure that you are playing kind of new chords or kind of duplicating your chords every time there's a kick drum to kind of get that like consistent effect. The next thing we're going to do, which I actually thought was a really, really cool effect, I'm just going to bring the cutoff down a little bit on this, was I actually brought up the amplitude of filter 2, which by default has just got no filter at all, so it's just a raw signal being passed through. And then what I did was put the performer on the mix amount between these 2 filters. So what's going to happen is when we're using the performer as kind of a modulation source, we're also going to get some of just the raw sound from the oscillator through, and you can kind of tune this to your own taste. I'll just quickly show you what this does. So this is with no modulation. You can kind of hear adds this like nice kind of soft, crispy high end to the top, which is really, really cool. And then this is kind of like amplified further when you add some reverb. I think I had quite a large size on this, and just brought the dry wet down a little bit. Really, really cool stuff. And then just to kind of polish the sound off, I think I put some chorus on the sound to brought the dry wet down a little bit. Don't want it to be too extreme. And then just kind of like EQ'd some of the lows out of the sound, because we do have the 808 sound for the lows, which, by the way, if you want to know how to make, just look on my channel. There's a massive tutorial on how to create your own 808 kick drums. You can just search that on the channel, or it might be in a related video, but definitely go check that out if you want to kind of know how to make your own 808s as well. But yeah, this is pretty much, I think, the finished sound I ended up with. Not too complicated. I'll just kind of show you the finished result. Really, really cool stuff, and to think that this is just without any external effects as well is really, really cool. The performer is just a really, really cool tool if you're using Massive for future bass. Definitely play around with the performer as much as you can, and try out different like shapes and stuff like that, and different like ratios. You can even like automate the ratio time and stuff in your in kind of your DAW or whatever you're using. Just use an automation to kind of add some variation as well. That'd be a pretty cool idea. And yeah, just really, really cool sound. Definitely play around with some different wavetables and stuff like that as well. You can really take this a lot further than it is now. Maybe layer it up with similar sounds. You know, try out some like crazy like external effects and stuff like that as well. And yeah, that covers everything. Hopefully you found it useful. If you did, please subscribe to stay up to date with new videos, and also leave a like on the video if it helped you out. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below. I do try to get back to as many people as I can. And again, if you haven't done so already, definitely go ahead and check out my website over at synthhacker.com to check out my presets for Massive and other synths as well. Really helps support me and the channel, and of course you'll get your hands on some nice presets as well. But that's all from me, guys. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.